Hi there, it's Tracy Kiernan from stepbysteppainting.net, and this acrylic painting tutorial is going to show you how to paint this spring bouquet in a glass vase with acrylics on an 11 by 14 inch canvas. I'm going to go ahead and get started right away here. I am going to be using this big brush to start off with for the background. It's a 1-inch flat brush. If you don't have a 1-inch flat brush, you can grab a 3/4 inch flat brush. And I'm going to be using a turquoise color in the background as well as titanium white. So I'm going to load my palette with titanium white and this other color called turquoise blue. It's one of the newer colors that Liquitex Basics came out with. If you don't have this one, you can use any light blue. You can use bright aqua green, or you can customize the colors in the background. And I am going to go ahead and load my large brush in some water and load it into the paint. So I'm going to be double loading this, which means I'm going to be loading it in both of those colors here. So I'm going to go ahead and apply the turquoise and the white to my brush. So I put the brush in the water and kind of tapped it dry, but I didn't take all the water off of that brush because I'm going to utilize some of that water on my brush to kind of thin the paint out a little bit there as I apply it to the brush. And I'm going to do all up and down strokes using the full width of the brush to allow that blue and that white to blend together to create a really pretty blue and white blend. So I'm just going to go ahead and do this on the entire canvas, leaving a little bit of a gap on the bottom. We're going to go all the way to the top and almost all the way to the bottom. So you can change how much white or how much turquoise you want in this. If you want some areas like in the middle to be kind of brighter or darker, depending on your preference, you can adjust the amount of paint. But I am just grabbing the white, grabbing the blue, going up and down. You want to try really hard not to blend it all the way. So if you do that, it'll end up being kind of the same color throughout, but I'm going for a two-toned background look here, and I'm just going to go ahead and finish this off. By the way, all of the materials that I use for these tutorials are in the description of the video. All of the brushes, all the colors, and I have a link to the brushes that I use, as well as the link to the tutorial that shows you the pictures and the directions. So I am going to go ahead and go silent here while I finish this step. Make sure that you continue to do the layer nice and even, so don't slap on too much thick paint. You can add a teeny bit of water to the tip of your brush like I did just now and apply it into the paint, but you don't want to use too much water because it'll start dripping down and kind of messing with the paint. So I will let you know what the next step is after I'm done with this. I'm going to add some more white kind of in the middle to give some brighter areas of white streaks in there. You don't have to do this too, but it kind of makes the background look a little pretty with the extra streaks of white in there. And again, I did leave a gap on the bottom, about a 1-inch space of gap, but we will be painting a table over that area in the next step. If you're working on a stretched canvas, you can take this color and apply it to the sides of the canvas. Next, I am going to demonstrate how I painted the table that the vase is standing on. You do not have to wait for your blue to dry, although if it's super soaking wet, you may want to get a hairdryer and dry it real quick, or wait a little bit and then come back to this step. But I am measuring about 3 inches from the bottom. It doesn't have to be exact. You can estimate 3 inches. I just measured it for so you can see how the position of that line. And I have my T-square ruler here, and I am loading my palette with burnt sienna and titanium white. I have my 1-inch brush, and I'm going to do the same thing that I did with the blue or yeah, with the blue and the white, double loaded it with the brown and white this time. A little bit more white than brown to make that table lighter. And I'm going to do horizontal strokes this time. So I use that T-square ruler as a guideline to get that straight line. And as soon as that straight line was there, get my son out of the way here, peeking through the window. As soon as that straight line was there, I removed the ruler and then I painted the rest of the table. So I'm allowing that brown and white to blend together to create that streaky look. We will make some more wood texture in that area later, but for now we're just doing brown and white blended, but not blended all the way. You will need to allow all of this to dry before we can go on to the next step. So now's a good time to rinse your brush in water. You can take a break and come back, or you can get a hair dryer and dry this really quick. But we are going to be using white chalk next to draw our vase. So this is very similar to some of my mason jar floral paintings that I've done in the past, only instead of a mason jar, we're doing a big glass. And I'm just going to take my chalk and kind of sketch out. So I want this big rounded glass that kind of goes down to more of an egg shape at the bottom. So it gets more narrow at the bottom. So I'm just going to take my chalk and kind of sketch out both sides of that glass, nice and big. So you don't, I mean, you can change the shape of your glass if you want, but you want it to be nice and big. It takes up the majority of the composition of the painting. It pretty much takes up half the canvas here. And then we have our bottom piece that is the kind of a narrow, sort of flat on the bottom, although it's not straight on the bottom, it's kind of curved at the bottom. And there's a little bit of space on the bottom. I'd say about an inch of space from the bottom of the canvas to the bottom of the vase. And then you want to kind of draw the top piece of that jar of the vase, but there's going to be flowers and leaves covering that area, so you don't really have to worry about what that looks like at the top. And then I'm going to start drawing some of the flower composition. You can just go ahead and paint your flowers in, but it's always nice to take that chalk and just kind of envision where you want your flowers to be. So I want several roses in this, and instead of drawing circles, I'm going to draw kind of an organic shape. So think circle, but the edges of that circle are kind of uneven, kind of like the edges of a rose. And I'm going to do two of them that are kind of pretty much on the bottom part of the vase, but then there's one up here. And this floral arrangement has quite a few different flowers, including daisies. So with the daisy, you can do the middle circle and the narrow petals that are coming out from the circle. Your drawing does not have to be perfect. It can be very sketch-like, and the only reason why we're doing this is so we can envision where our flowers are going to be. Sometimes when it's time to paint these flowers in, we get kind of tangled up with where they're going to be situated at. So there's going to be another daisy over here, and you can always change this around. You can, if you want to do less daisies, no daisies, all roses, so it's up to you. And I just did a tulip painting with the tulip in the boots, so I'm going to do those same kind of tulips in this one as well. So with that painting, I don't know if you watched that tutorial or not, but the tulip boot tutorial, I drew that middle oval piece, and then I did the side petals for those tulips. And then I'm not sure what kind of flower these are going to be, but they're just kind of generic center circle flowers with generic petals, maybe 4 or 5 petals going around. They can be poppies, maybe. So we're just going to do those two that are kind of tucked behind the roses. And so when we start painting this in, we may decide to change a placement of a flower. Sometimes our drawing ends up being different when we start painting it in. I'm going to be demonstrating how to paint the roses first. I will be using, so we needed some fresh water for this. We don't want any other brown or turquoise ending up. And I have a fresh palette too, because my blue took up the rest of my palette for the background. This is a number 8 round brush. I'll be using this brush for the entire flower area. If you find that brush too thick, you can always find a smaller one or something. I recommend a round, but a round brush you feel comfortable with. You can use a big one for the bigger pieces and a smaller one for some of the smaller details. And I'm going to use these 3 colors, light pink, deep violet, and titanium white. Grab that number 8 round brush, load it in a little bit of water and tap it out. You don't want too much water on this. Start with the light pink color and go ahead and fill in one of your roses. I'm going to start with this one down here. So I just like to start in the middle and paint in circular strokes going outwards. And instead of it being a circle, I'm going to have my edges of the circle be kind of organic. So I'm taking that and I'm making the edges of that rose more of a shape and not so much a circle. And so there's my first base color. Then I'm going to do that to each of my roses, but I don't want them all to be the same tint of pink. This one, I'm going to add a little bit of white to my palette and blend it together on the palette, or mix it together on the palette, and I'm going to do the same thing. So you can see the difference with that one, especially if this rose ended up touching the other one in the painting, like see how close it is. Because it's a different color, it makes it stand out a little bit and gives it a little bit more interest when it's not all the same color. So same thing, start with a circle, but make the edges kind of uneven and organic. And then you can do your third rose. So this one I just added more of that light pink in there. It's probably got a little bit of white left on my brush, so it's slightly lighter. So I guess technically all three of them are different tints of that pink, and you're going to fill it in. So before this dries, we are going to be doing the darker petal color in those roses. It's a pretty generous layer of paint there, so I didn't apply it very thin. It's pretty a thick layer of paint. But you're going to get a towel and wipe the brush off, but don't rinse it off. Grab that deep violet color, spread it out on your palette. It should turn lighter because you have some of that lighter pink. And if it doesn't turn lighter, grab a little bit more light pink on your palette. We don't want it to be super dark, but we do want it to be darker than that pink. So this is that purple. It kind of turned into a pretty plum color. I'm going to start in the middle, and I'm going to do these C-style strokes with my brush. And you're going to just kind of stagger these C strokes outward. So I'm pressing kind of light at first, but I'm pressing hard as I'm making that curve. So when I press hard, you can see all my bristles of the brush go down, and I use that full brush of the bristles. And so I'm going to kind of do it again. So I grabbed a little bit more of that deep violet. I'm going to make that middle part a little bit darker. And just using just the tip of my brush here to make kind of smaller strokes, but I want to make that little part darker so there's some contrast in my rose and not just the same color all throughout. And so that's how I do my simple roses, and I'm just going to repeat this technique for the other two. And color variation is something that I like, so I'm adding more lighter pink color to this one. So these ones are going to be slightly lighter than the other one. So again, start in the middle, do your C strokes that kind of stagger like bricks all the way around as you work your way outwards in your rose. Grab a darker color, so grab that darker purple, go back in the middle, add some darker strokes in the middle of the rose. And you don't want to keep going over your strokes because it's just going to kind of all mush together. So you want to kind of let it be and not keep going over it. It takes a lot of practice with these roses. So if you want, practice on some sketch paper before you feel comfortable doing this. And then for my third rose, again, I grabbed a little bit more white in there just to make this plum color a little bit lighter. I'm going to go back over this with a darker color because this is not standing out, but it's a really pretty color. So I'm grabbing more of the deep violet color, and I'm going to go back over that middle part. So start in the middle and do your C strokes that stagger around your rose to create the shape. So if you wanted to do more roses, you can, if you really like that technique. I think, yes, later in this painting, I ended up adding another rose in there. But for now, I'm going to do the tulips next. So different technique. I'm going to do the same technique that I did with my tulip rain boot painting. So, but these are going to be yellow tulips. So I have Cad Yellow Medium Hue on my palette. I'm going to mix some light pink into it to make it kind of a sort of peachy looking color. So with these tulips, and I'm still using that 8 round brush, I'm going to start by painting the center oval piece first. Get a little bit more water in there because that paint's kind of drying on me here. So center oval piece. And then you're going to do the same thing to your other tulip or tulips. And so this one has the center piece. And then I'm going to do a third one in here, a tulip that I did not draw. So this one's going to kind of go over my daisy, but that's okay. And you're going to go ahead and load that brush in some titanium white so that your yellow becomes a super light color yellow. Start at the bottom of the tulip, press with your brush and form the side petal of your tulip. And do it again to the other side. So start at the bottom, press with the brush to form your other side tulip. And we can go back in there and kind of do some low lighting or highlighting to those petals if needed. You can also start at the top and press down like I'm doing with this tulip. So I did the 3 petals on that tulip. I started at the top and I curved downwards. So pressing with your brush and kind of releasing the pressure will allow you to create those strokes that I'm creating. And I did the same thing with that tulip as well. So if you need to, grab your, so this is just the yellow color, grabbing it to make that petal stand out on that side. Doing a little bit more yellow on that side. The same thing with right here, just grabbing a little bit more yellow and kind of painting one side of the petal so that it stands out from the other petals. So that's a very basic way that you can paint tulips in your bouquet paintings. And we're going to go ahead, rinse, and do the daisies next. So I'll be doing this with the 8 round as well. Load it with burnt sienna and some Mars Black. Rinse that brush all the way, get it wiped off. And so I'm mixing the black and brown together to make a really, really dark brown. And I'm just going to go ahead and paint the center circles of these flowers first. So I'm just using the tip of the brush and I'm painting a circle for the center. This center I had to move over a little bit because my rose was going to overlap that one too much. And then I'm going to rinse that off and I'm going to do the petals. So with these petals, I have kind of a cream color petal in the back and a super bright white petal. If you look closely, there's some 2 different tones in that white. To get that cream color, you're going to mix just a teeny bit of that brown into the white, mix it all the way. So it's going to turn to a very off-white color. And you're just going to paint your petals in. So I'm kind of alternating. So these darker petals are going to be in the back. So I'm just going to paint 4 of the petals, 4 or 5, depending on how your flower goes here. And then same thing with this one. And I'm just going to have to decide what petal is overlapping what flower. And I guess this one's going to kind of go that way. And then you're going to rinse the brush off and get some fresh titanium white on your palette so that we can do the brighter white petals. So same thing, start at the center part and you can have these brighter white petals overlap the darker ones. In fact, it really creates a nice effect when it does overlap the other petals. So just forming that simple petal shape, long, sort of, I guess it's kind of pointed at the tip. These are not realistic flowers. They're very loose, sort of illustrative flowers. And this petal is kind of going to go this way. I'm going to have this one look like it's going behind the tulip here. I don't want to cover that tulip because I like how that tulip looks. And then you're just going to kind of repeat the same thing with the other daisy. If you decide that you didn't want a flower to overlap another flower, you can always go back and redo. So like right here with the rose, I wanted that rose to be in front of that daisy. So I just grabbed that pink and redid the side part of the petal. And then I'm going to add a little bit of texture to some of these petals, just grabbing a little bit of white on the tip of my brush, and I'm going in the center part, and I'm just doing these lines that kind of wisp out, and they're blending with that darker white as well, because that darker white's not dry all the way, and just gives it a little bit of added texture in that area. I'm going to add some more light pink to my palette, and I'm going to go in and touch this up. Try to create that color again right here with that rose on its side, just to make sure that it is definitely in front of that daisy. Next, I'm going to rinse and dry. I'm going to do a little bit of added texture in the middle of these daisies. So I'm rinsing, drying, using the very tip of my brush to grab some of that black and brown combination, and I'm just going to do dots. And I'm going to make these little dots overlap kind of the base of some of those petals. So you can see how it creates that texture. And just doing that to both of the flowers. So just doing dots that overlap the base slightly of those petals. Next, I'm going to rinse and load my palette with Cad Orange Hue. I'm going to be painting those orange flowers that are kind of tucked away. And I'm going to add some white into this to make it a lighter orange, a little bit of yellow then. And sometimes it's fun to just play around with the colors on your palette and make up new colors when you're doing flowers, because there's no right or wrong with these colors here. And I'm just going to paint these petals. This one is really tucked away behind some of the flowers, so it's very abstract. We see the petals and they're just behind pretty much the rest of the flowers. This one's going to be overlapping that other flower, so I grabbed a bit more orange for this so it would stand out from that other orange flower, but it's still behind that tulip and behind that rose. And I wanted it to have 5 petals, but that other petals, I guess, is hiding. I'm going to grab some white on the tip of my brush here and kind of go over some of these petals to let that white blend in the middle part of those petals and just kind of blend it out. Same thing with this one, so white in the middle and just kind of stroking it outwards to blend with the rest of the flower. And then I can take that white and kind of outline some of the petals if needed, if they need to stand out. Then I'm going to rinse and dry that brush, grab some of my brown and black combination, and do some center pieces for the flower. So I'm just going to do little dots right there in the center. And then the center of this one as well. I'm going to rinse that off and dry it and load my palette with some Hooker's Green Hue Permanent. So there's another kind of flower in this painting, the baby's breath flower. And so I'm going to use the tip of my brush to paint the stems of these. So this is much like painting tree branches. I'm only loading that paint right there on the tip of my brush to create that very, very thin line. You will need a very light hand to get that thin branched line. So I'm just making these lines kind of branch out like tree branches. If your brush doesn't do that, because it doesn't go to a point, I recommend getting a very, very thin brush, or you can even try doing it with an angle brush to get that thin line. I'm not going to do the white dots for the baby's breath yet because I want those branches to dry, but I'm going to make a fun color on my palette here. I have the green, the Hooker's Green, a little bit of white, a little bit of yellow, watered it down slightly for flow purposes. I'm going to do the tulip leaf. So with these tulip leaves, you want to press super hard with your brush at first, curve up, Then release the pressure as you work your way down to go to a point with those leaves. I used that lighter color first, and I did my second stroke with a darker color. So that darker color created some color variation with that leaf. I'm going to do another one. So I'm mixing kind of a different color, added a little bit more yellow in this one. Press hard at first, release the pressure, let it go to a point. Press hard, release the pressure, let it go to a point. So it'll create a different shade of green in there, but also a different shape of the leaf because of the way I did the brush that time. Then I'm going to do a different kind of leaf in here, again making a fun different color on my palette. You can utilize the yellow, the green, and the white to create different variations of green in there. And this is going to be more of a traditional shape leaf, I guess, so an actual leaf shape, assuming they're rose leaves, although I'm not going to do the detailed pointed edges on them. I'm going to do another one here, kind of a longer leaf, but it's darker so that it'll stand out from that other leaf. And then I'll do a third leaf. So you're just loading your palette in different amounts of the green, the yellow, and the white to create different variations in that color of green to make it look more interesting and not all the same color. Then I can take that and use the very, very tip of my brush to create some of these stems that might be showing through. We're not going to do too many stems with this because the flowers are pretty much in the front here. These tulip stems, the base of the tulip kind of trumpets out to kind of hug the bottom of the tulip, and then it goes downward. So we don't really see the base of a lot of these tulips because it's hiding. And that's it for the stems there. And then I'm going to go in and add some more colors to these leaves. So this one down here, I did that center piece. Grab a little bit of white on the tip of my brush. I can use that white to create the center line, and then I can use the tip of my brush plus the white to do the veins of these leaves. Same with this one, the white on the tip of the brush. Very, very lightly do the veins. And then this one as well. We'll adjust that so that it actually looks like it's not going off of the leaf there. You can kind of play around with these greens if you wanted one of the leaves to be overlapping. So see how that was an easy fix. I wanted that tulip leaf to be overlapping the other leaf, so I just stroked over it again. Add a little bit more white on there. If you want some highlight on your leaves, you can grab a little bit of white and mix it with the green and do one side of the leaf with a lighter color. Next, I'm going to rinse that brush off, dry it, and I'm going to do the little dots for the baby's breath. You can also do this technique with some cotton swabs, Q-tips, because we're going to be painting a whole bunch of little dots. Sometimes that's fun to do with a cotton swab. But I'm just doing that with the tip of my brush, and I'm doing little clusters of dots. I love adding baby's breath to floral bouquet paintings because it adds such a really pretty, delicate touch to the painting. And it's fun to do all these little dots everywhere. So I just took that, and if you notice, some of my dots are varied. So they're in clusters, but some of them are super, super faint and small. Some of them are larger, so you want to create some variety in that. So to make the larger dots, you press harder with the brush. To make the smaller brush, you press very, very lightly. I'm just going to do that to each of my little branches that I painted for the baby's breath. I love how this one is just hanging down over the vase. And this video is speeding up a little bit here because this part actually takes quite a bit of time because that's a lot of dots to paint. But take your time, relax. This is super relaxing. I don't know about you, but I love painting little dots in paintings. And I just love the effect that this baby's breath gives. So I'm going to go silent here for a little bit while I finish this step. I'm going to take this white that's on the tip of my brush and I'm going to do a little bit of white texture in the center of these daisies. Not too much, just a little subtle few white dots in there. And if you wanted to do a little bit of highlighting on your tulips, grab some white and yellow, so a super bright version of that yellow. And I'm just going to take that and add a few strokes of that super bright white on. I'm just going to pick a side of each of these petals and just add a few strokes of that lighter color in there. And then I'm going to go in and I'm going to make the center piece of that rose a little bit darker. Give it some extra contrast right there. So I'm for the most part done with the flowers, and I would like to do these stems next. We're going to do the vase glass, but before we can do vase glass, we got to paint these stems in. And so I'm going to grab this Hooker's Green Hue color, freshen it, a little bit of yellow. So kind of like what we did with the leaves, we grabbed just different various amounts of yellow, green, and white. Add it to the tip of your brush. Start at the top and stroke down super fast to create these stems. So there's several flowers in this. They'd all be kind of bundled together and we would see their stems just kind of gathered together at the top, but then they kind of flare out at the bottom. And it's very abstract, so you're just stroking down super fast to create the edge of that stem. And remember, the glass is over it, so we really wouldn't see much detail with the stems. And I'm doing color variation here on purpose because the stems would be kind of different shade or tints of that green, hues of that green. Grabbing yellow, grabbing more green, a little bit of white, so kind of make your stems all different colors. You can go back over them. Mine, I didn't really like how dry it got on the bottom, so I'm just going back over some of these from the bottom up just to kind of make that line look more even. Then I'm going to go back over this leaf here. I didn't like how that stem overlapped that leaf because definitely that leaf is sticking out of my vase instead of being inside the vase. I suppose you can have your leaves be inside the vase, but mine are definitely on the outside. And before we can do the glare over that, all that green needs to dry. But what we can do with the vase is start outlining the outer edges of it. So you're going to need to freshen up some titanium white if it's not already fresh on your palette. Rinse the brush off, dry it, get that white right there on the tip. And this is one of those things where if this brush doesn't go to a tip for you, find a small brush that does go to a tip because you really need this line to be super, super fine. So you're just going to take the white and paint over that chalk line that you drew. Your chalk will erase as you go over it, but if there's any residual chalk left, when that paint dries, we can get a wet brush and get rid of all that chalk. But for now, I am just outlining my drawing that I did with the white. Down here, this bottom piece is going to be extra thick right there in the bottom. I'm actually going to make it super thick, and I'm going to paint in curved strokes and let that curve kind of fade out. Kind of dry brush style. When that brush runs out of paint, it just looks super dry. And that dry brush style is actually super important for that vase because we'll be doing dry brush style over the middle area of our glass to make it look like there's some glare, but not until those green stems dry. And I'm going to do the base of that, so adding that white just into the tip of it and create your base shape. For some reason, these bases are always super tricky. And I'm just going to kind of add a white sort of glare piece on the bottom. Maybe this kind of curves this way and dries out in the middle. So we're not painting it super solid white. We're making sure that a lot of that brown from the table is still showing through because it is a glass vase. It's translucent, it's see-through. And so dry brush style, we'll do some of this dry brush, but not over the green part yet. So you load it into the white and you wipe it off with the towel and you do your curved stroke in the direction of the vase, and it should be dry and translucent and see-through. So if you're painting your stroke and it's solid, you need to wipe off some more paint. Sometimes instead of wiping it off, I load it and then I drag it out on the palette, so the palette is wiping that paint off, but it's pretty much the same concept. You only have a little bit of paint on your brush. Sometimes it helps to add, you can do it the same way and make your paint super, super watered down. You just want to be careful with that, with the super watered down paint, because that water can kind of mess with our painting some. But that's another way you can do that. So super watered down white. My leaf got, my green kind of bled into that white a little bit there. So I just did that dry brush thing on the sides and the bottom. I want to do some dry brush glare that overlaps my stems. So I took a hair dryer and I dried everything. And while everything is dry, I'm going to get a wet brush and I'm going to erase any residual chalk lines. So I don't want those chalk lines kind of messing with things. So wet brush, chalk line, hair dryer to dry the painting. Then I'm going to go over my vase again, and I'm just going to make sure the edge is super bright white, nice and thin, super bright white. Make sure that line is continuous and nice and flowing. So I'm just going over my shape, making sure that line is nice and sharp, and going over my bottom piece down there and this piece right here. So super thin line, make sure it flows on that edge to create that shape. And then I can let my paintbrush run out, dry brush style. Again, either wipe the paint off with your palette or wipe it off with a towel. And I'm going to do some more dry brush on the bottom piece, but also over these stems. So we're going to purposefully curve it. This one went over the leaf, and that's okay because we can always go back and redo our leaf to make that sure that leaf is overlapping. But in the middle, I have those dry brush strokes going in a curved circular direction. I'm going to make sure I overlap those stems that are right in the middle, and this part right here is going to go more in a circle. And just make sure that that white is super, super dry. You can have a few areas, like right there I did a brighter streak, I guess, but just make sure that you're not using too much white in there. And then I'm going to go back over my leaf that I covered with that dry brush. So make sure if you did that, you can always paint over your leaves, but the stems are definitely inside of that glass. So we don't need to paint over our stems again. Next, I'm going to demonstrate how I did the shadow and wood texture on the table. So you want to completely rinse the brush, and you want to take the brown and black combination that you have on your palette, freshen it up if you need to. So it's the brown and the black. Water it down slightly, load it in the brush, and you're just going to paint a very, very thin layer of that right under the base of the vase, and just to make it look like there's some shadow in that area. Then I'm going to take this thinned paint, add it just to the tip of my brush here. I'm going to divide my table up into 3 wood panels, and let me show you. So I did a horizontal line all the way across. It doesn't have to be perfect. It could be uneven, a little bit wavy. The least imperfect, the better, because it's a wood texture. And same thing with here. So we divide the table, or I divided that table up into thirds. And right here in the shadowy area, you may need a little bit of black in there to get it to stand out. It's going to go all the way across. And then we're just going to take this, and I'm going to gently, very, very gently add some thin horizontal lines in there to create the wood texture. I can create some little cat eye shapes to create the knots in the woods. You just do this kind of curved thing that kind of staggers outwards, and very, very subtle, soft. It's still that watered down black and brown combination, so you don't want to press too hard. It's very, very light with the brush, and you can even add a little bit more shadow in that area, and just a few horizontal lines here and there, a few little knot shaped lines here and there. That creates the wood texture. If you want, you can go in there with a little bit of white, so if you want some lighter looking texture in there, you can do that. I'm going to add another rose in this painting because there's an area right over here where I think a rose would look lovely to kind of cover that area, that space that's showing through. So I'm going to do a yellow base for this rose. So yellow and white. Adding white to yellow is always a good idea to make that yellow more opaque to give it some good coverage. So I'm just going to take that and I'm going to be nice and brave and let it overlap those two pink roses. So start by painting a circle and make the edges not so circle looking. I'm going to use orange as my second color in this rose. So I'm going to wipe off this brush a little bit, a little overloaded with yellow. So add some orange, mix it with the yellow to make it a little bit lighter. Start in the center and do your C strokes that kind of staggered outwards. Press hard with that brush as you're doing your curved strokes. Center part has a little few darker strokes of orange in there, but we can take that orange all the way out if we wanted to. And so that rose is front and center lowered, and I like how it's covering that extra space in there. So if you wanted to go in and add some more flowers in different areas, you can. You can add more leaves in different areas. So there's a lot of things you can kind of do to fill this vase up, or you can simplify it and call it a finished painting. So it's up to you. I'm taking this green and white combination and I'm going to do the veins on that leaf that I had to paint over the glass in that area. So right there on the tip of the brush, the lighter green, adding white to that green lightens it up. And I'll just do the little veins that are on that leaf right there. Going to touch up this one as well. Take this and maybe add a few little touch-ups to some of the other leaves. A little bit of darker green in there, give it some contrast. And then I'm going to wedge another leaf in here to kind of go over this open space that's in this area. So a lighter color, smaller leaf that's kind of peeking through. And I'll darken it a little bit here. So this painting tutorial is coming to its conclusion. In a little bit, this video is going to pop to a couple other things that I added to the painting after I stopped filming the video. So sometimes this happens. I find something else creative to add to the video, but super simple. So the rose right here was the same technique rose that I did up in the area, but I just did it on the table and I added a leaf and a stem. And I did this other kind of leaf with the center stem prong, same colors. I did a lighter color of green and small sort of oval leaves sort of sticking out on both sides. So I like the variety that it kind of just adds extra touch to the painting. But that is it. This is the conclusion of how to paint a spring bouquet vase. I hope that you enjoyed painting with me too. Thanks for watching and painting with me.